Welcome to the Footballco Business Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Manby, and today I'm speaking to Alan Granger, Head of Brand and Marketing at Sports Interactive, who developed the hugely successful Football Manager game. In the early 1990s, Sports Interactive rose to fame off the back of the Championship Manager series, which in 2003 became Football Manager, following an infamous split with then publisher Eidos. Today, Football Manager is played by millions of fans around the world, from wannabe managers to elite players like Antoine Griezmann and Ilkay Gundogan. So in the context of Football Manager 2023 coming out on November the 8th, I'm keen to understand how the game keeps players coming back for more and how it attracts new users. But before we get into that, here are a few mind-boggling stats for you. The game is played in more than 190 countries. For Football Manager 2022 alone, the average player has played 300 hours, totaling around 402 million matches in which more than 969 million goals have been scored. And yes, 30 million of those by one Erling Haaland. Right, while we digest those incredible numbers, Alan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So Alan, I want to talk a bit about who's playing the game. But before that, I want to have a little personal reflection on my experiences, not because I think anyone really cares about what I did with Canvey Island back on FM 2005, taking them from Conference South to Champions League glory, but more because I think it's interesting, as in I'll be a certain type of demographic in amongst others. So I played a lot from about Championship Manager 2 through till about FM 2010. If I was at home, if I was watching TV, if I was at uni, I pretty much had my laptop with me. This was second screening before we understand it how we currently understand it. But then sort of post-uni, I didn't have as much time and I gradually sort of dropped out. And I probably haven't played Football Manager for 5 or 6 years. So, not necessarily a conscious decision. I think life just got in the way. So anyway, slightly rambling sort of personal reflection. But I think in the context of my first question, sort of interesting to see if that's typical and if, there's a way back for attracting people like me. So what I'd be interested in knowing is who's playing Football Manager these days? Tell me about the different audiences you attract.
Well, first and foremost, we won't hold it against you for not playing anymore. We know that sometimes life gets in the way, We see a lot from our kind of older demographic that, when they start to get, the kind of life, kind of experiences and responsibilities, that their capacity to play dwindles. They might have a child, they might be more senior in their role. And, the game, in order to get, something out of it, does take a reasonable amount of commitment, which we obviously understand through, the tracking and analysis of gameplay. To talk about our core audience, I think that's, quite soundly in the 25 to 34 male bracket. We, as a studio, have been doing a tremendous amount of work over the past couple of years on audience. Speaking to existing players, but also, speaking to lapsed players and also unaware players, really just to understand exactly what's going on, with their experience. And we've distilled that down into 6 different persona types who are playing the game. And they range from people who are kind of more modern contemporary fans who might support bigger clubs, who play the game through the prism of their existing football knowledge and just get stuck into the game, versus people who are a bit more calculated. They tend to be what we would call more traditional football fans. They might play as a local club. They might play as a smaller club. And their approach to the game is very different. They're more strategic and tactical about the way they approach the game. And then you've got your kind of more experienced managers. And then you've got what we call the gurus, people who are now so good at the game, they're teaching others how to play. And then you've got what we call the dippers. They're people who would love to play more, but can't for a variety of reasons outlined, obviously, at the start. And needless to say, as part of our understanding of audience, we have to cater for these people in very different ways, whether that's through, tactics or channels or messaging or just the kind of general proposition of what Football Manager is and what it can be. And needless to say, over the course of the last 3-4 years, we've been adding more and more platforms to cater for the reality that if you are older, you have more responsibilities. You're probably never going to be able to come back to the full fat simulation on PC, but you maybe still want to get that fix, that exposure, maybe during an hour of feeding, or maybe when you're watching the game on a Sunday when you're second screening, or maybe when you're on a commute into the office. So being on platforms which we are this year, such as Apple Arcade, or PS5, or previously Nintendo Switch, it just offers a wider kind of variety and opportunity for people to still access FM. And as I said, needless to say, how we do that, the tone, the messaging, the creative, the positioning, it needs to try and talk to what people expect and probably also what they don't want, and I think, it's pretty common, place and knowledge that there's an attitude towards Football Manager that, you have to invest an obscene amount of time in it in order to get, the kind of the return from it. But we're trying to bring new things to the market, new products to the market to try and, kind of quash that and dispel that, like Arcade, where you can, play on your mobile, transfer it to your iPad, transfer it to your Mac, and you can have a more casual experience, but just, transfer the career around your life, as it were, whether it's on the commute into work or whether it's, as I said, second screening on your iPad. So a lot of work continues on audience, and I think a lot of our insights at the moment are predominantly focused around the audiences that we know best, which is the UK, and our audiences that engage with us on social media. And we want to go out and validate that, in other territories, Germany, the US, other key footballing territories where we anticipate that we can, grow our audiences. It all comes back to really the audience experience and a desire for us to personalize the experience. And that's really what's driving us in terms of, connecting with consumers.
So do you have any examples there of how you might try to talk differently to, for example, the time-rich teenager or student versus your time-poor new parent? Is it different channels or is it different messaging? What are some of those examples?
It can be all of those things. So, for example, language is a critical element of that. So the full fat simulation game, PC Mac, that's all about depth and immersion, and detail. And we'll really work carefully to remove that type of kind of commitment, as it were, on platforms such as mobile or Switch, where, that proposition is really not going to fit the device. I think creatively as well, we can do things such as the use of talent or the use of assets in certain spaces that might appeal or not appeal to different types of audiences. So, for example, this year we partnered with UEFA, which was a really big deal for us. We get access to the rights, and then it's a case of, right, who do these rights best talk to? Which audiences are going to most engage with the UEFA brand, the Champions League, the Europa League. And then tactically, we can use those assets to try and, kind of generate recall and cut through in certain spaces and certain channels. As I said, going back to audience, we know that the younger audience, the more modern contemporary football fan whose maybe relationship with football is actually through gaming as a starting point, they might, respond better to the Champions League than, a kind of older existing core fan who maybe plays the game as, the local team, Leyton Orient in my case, So it's always about trying to use, the right type of insights to drive the right type of tactics, the right type of channels. For example, at the moment, we're seeing a tremendous growth on TikTok. But even in the studio, many of us who are still existing Football Manager players don't use TikTok. So it's like, how can we be more relevant and native to the expectations of consumers on that platform? What does the messaging then need to look like? What does the creative then need to look like? How does that differ from more traditional channels and audiences such as, Twitter, which is kind of the bread and butter of our online presence? So yeah, it's just trying to be razor focused on message and tone and all of those things that make up, creatives in the digital space.
I'm keen to talk about creators and online communities and how you engage with them. And my first question there is, I feel like every time a new Football Manager comes out, there's this sort of huge explosion of commentary about it, and everybody's got their opinion and their voice. And what frequently comes about is this effusive, positive, optimistic messaging of, I'm going to take 2 weeks off work to play this game, or, I'm putting my life on hold just because I want to play this game. In the context of what you're saying about needing to appeal to different demographics, when you see that on Twitter or on Reddit, is that useful, or do you kind of wince and think, oh God, that's just reinforcing this stereotype that you can only play if you've got hundreds of hours available?
It's a difficult one. I think, cards on the table, that, I need to take 2 weeks off to play this. I need to make a dent in this. I'm so excited. I think that's great for us. There's a tremendous buzz and optimism that always exists, during the release cycle. But you could also look at that and think, well, what is that saying about the barrier to entry for new players who are like, wow, I heard this game's, really, kind of tricky and requires a real time commitment. And I'm seeing people in the digital space saying that, they're booking off annual leave to play. I think the reality of that is that I think a lot of that excitement and that, that commentary, it tends to happen in a little bit of an echo chamber in some respects, because it's existing online Football Manager communities where other people who, share the same interests, play and live. So we don't necessarily get a tremendous amount of kind of, share a voice and cut through with that optimism that comes from, the kind of hardcore community. But in terms of like, the kind of negative side of things, like it is something for us that we're constantly trying to find ways to challenge, because it's the old adage of like, if you have a positive experience, you tell 3 people. If you have a negative experience, you tell 10 people plus. So if you think about the kind of lineage into FM, which we kind of track and analyze, is always through friends and family. So like, let's say big brothers telling little brothers or little sisters, about the game. We know that some of them are saying, look, that game took over my life. That game, dominated my time at university. And needless to say, going back to the previous question, we're always trying to kind of deal with that and challenge that and contend with that when it comes to the promotion of a new game, finding new ways to make the game relevant to new audiences. But it's a real thing, You obviously touched on, the creator community as well. These guys are, doing a fantastic job of engaging their audiences. I've seen in my 9 years at SI really the kind of growth of that and the sophistication of what that now looks like. They're putting in a tremendous amount of time, many of whom are full-time. The production values are fantastic, and, the level of commitment that they're putting into the game.
Is this mostly on YouTube when you think about these creators, or other platforms as well?
Yeah, I mean, mainly, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say exclusively. We have a long-standing kind of blogger editorial community who produce, hints, tips, guides, different ways to explore and approach the game. But we've seen over the last probably 5 years or so, like a real explosion of, the kind of YouTube creator community, which obviously now extends into Twitch as well. As I said, like very sophisticated. I know they do a tremendous amount of work together on some of the, stuff that they produce, Streamer Showdown, other things that, really for us as a studio are fantastic, in terms of how that positions the game. And yeah, I think they're kind of central to the buzz and optimism that exists, with any given release cycle.
So I'm interested in hearing about how you work with these creators, because there's a huge army of them out there, overwhelmingly positive feedback and reaction to any game that comes out, be it on YouTube, on Twitter, and the views are enormous. The interactions are enormous. I saw one tweet, I'm sure you saw it too, a couple of months ago, that came out, and someone had simulated 100 years of Football Manager 22 and published these are the Premier League winners, the Champions League winners, the World Cup winners, and people took it very seriously, whether it was celebrating their team or their country winning a tournament or predicting a bright future or whatever it might be. What's your interaction with these guys? Do you give them free copies of the game? Do you interact with them? Do you encourage them to do this? You don't pay them, do you?
There's no official direct relationship between ourselves and the creator community. There's certainly no commercial arrangement. Obviously, we do give them access to SI as a brand, as a studio, but they're not contracted in any way to do anything or say anything FM related. I think what we have tried to do over the course of the years is to bring them closer to the studio. I suppose in a sense to reward, the fantastic things that they do online. The content that they create, as you mentioned, is fantastic. It drives awareness of the game. It's very creative. There's a lot of sophistication and commitment that goes into making it. I think we, bring them into SI. We have done, capture days where they can record from an alpha, QAs, where they can connect with Miles and ask questions to the dev team and meet people across the studio. I think, just like with the wider community, people who might engage with us on social or engage with us through the SI forums, we really care about what they have to say about what we do or what we're not doing. And we take that stuff really seriously, and it's good for us to kind of bridge that gap in terms of, just whether it's feedback, stuff they're experiencing on stream, or just general ideas. And needless to say, some of that will validate what we already are planning on doing. Some of that might challenge it. But, it all collectively goes together to kind of help shape, the kind of dev cycle and the roadmap that we have for future iterations of the game. I think we've, as I said, we've actually invested in this area as well to kind of, develop a relationship with the community. We've recently brought on board a community liaison who was actually a personality within the creator community to, again, better understand, the personalities and essentially the needs of the community, because I think fundamentally, where we are as a business, the creator community and the wider community is obviously a really central part of that. Their enjoyment and love of the game has really, helped power, new people coming into the fold. And needless to say, as I said, like we do, we anyone who engages with us, we take it all very seriously, and we, use those relationships and connections to help shape, what we're thinking about and what we're doing from a dev standpoint.
Are these guys mostly on YouTube, on Twitch? Are they cross-platform?
Yeah, cross-platform. There's been a surge of YouTube and Twitch over the course of the last probably 5 or so years. Certainly when I started, probably 8-9 years ago, it was kind of dominated by editorial, bloggers and blog sites who create, tactical guides and, hints and tips on how to play the game, that type of thing. But it's diversifying further. There's now kind of meme pages on Instagram and TikTok, and generally across the social space, you'll find creators of all shapes and sizes.
You mentioned Miles a minute ago. For those who don't know, that's presumably Miles Jacobson, director at Football Manager, and probably not unfair to say, to some extent, the face of the game. Do you think that's fair? How closely do you work with him? I certainly think he's a sort of reference point for any news about the game or any discussion about the game. He's pretty bold and outspoken. He's certainly not afraid to sort of share his point of view. What's the relationship like between you and him when thinking about how you're communicating about games?
Yeah, I think way before my time, Miles was very heavily involved in the foundations of FM's online presence. I think over the years, Miles has become less and less involved. As we've added to the department, the comms and marketing function is now 15 plus people. And now that the brand is very heavily established itself across kind of all social and kind of digital touch points, we kind of utilize, I suppose, Miles's personal brand less and less. But needless to say, by the nature of Miles's openness and obviously incredible achievements in this space, his personal brand has obviously grown significantly over the years. And I think where it's relevant, where it makes most sense, we've got a very open dialogue with Miles about how his personal account might support the brand account. There was a recent situation where we had to delay an announcement, and Miles's account was really the perfect vehicle for that. So there's definitely a kind of strategic role that his account can play, but it is a personal account. I think Miles, as you can see, is very active on Twitter. He's a real force of nature, and I don't think there's anybody across any vertical in his position that's as open and as accessible. And tremendous credit to him. He really goes out of his way to kind of service all the questions and complaints and just general feedback that he gets in that space. And as I said, for us, it's about strategically, like, how can Miles's personal brand kind of support the FM brand.
Come for the Football Manager tweets, stay for the updates on Watford Football Club is the way that I see it with Miles's Twitter account.
Absolutely.
I'm keen to talk about footballers, famous current or past football players. A lot of them play Football Manager, the likes of Antoine Griezmann, Ilkay Gundogan. To be clear, again, these are fans, not paid ambassadors, right? And how much of a boost is it when they start tweeting or uploading photos on Instagram or other social channels of themselves playing and enjoying the game?
We're tremendously blessed with earned media, overall. But I think, when it comes to pro players and elite talent, some of whom you mentioned, I think the truth is that we really couldn't pay for that kind of coverage and awareness. And I think, the key factor there is really just it's authenticity, isn't it? They're not delivering a branded message. They're just enjoying the ride as a fan. And I think when you look at the examples, the height of it, you've got, Ousmane Dembele, who's, sitting on the bus after winning the World Cup, talking about his, Winchester save. Or you've got Griezmann, flying to a Euro 2020 game, telling Mbappe in real time that he's bought him for Newcastle, and Mbappe responding by saying, "Oh, it's pretty cold there," Like this is as real as it gets, And I think we've found in the past that working with talent and kind of pro players who maybe aren't authentic fans of the game or who don't know the game, that the quality of the output it's just not what it needs to be of any relevance or interest to players or prospects. Consumers these days are savvy, and we know that better than most. So we often just sit back and enjoy it. Really, we don't try and harness it. We don't try and leverage it. We just let it breathe and do its thing. And I think I think in terms of that authenticity factor, I think that's really the way that we're best placed to kind of gain from it.
Do you ever get a sense that they're doing it for anything other than fun? And I'll explain myself. I feel like Championship Manager into Football Manager has many times blurred the line between being a fun bit of gaming for their users and actually being a tool that can be more than that. There are plenty of stories about football clubs, managers using the game to scout players on the other side of the world because there's no way they could do it. The Collier brothers had a relationship with Everton, didn't they? Because they were fans of it. Do you ever get the sense that these players who are playing are doing it either to scout out other players they might come up against or possibly preparing themselves for a path into football management after they hang up their boots?
Well, I suppose we know from our relationships within the professional game and our club partners and the people that we're connected with that it's a wide variety of different reasons. I think footballers travel a lot. long journeys to games and back. They've got very different lifestyles to you and I. They've got a lot of free time and not the same kind of freedom to enjoy it. By going out or kind of hitting the town or doing whatever it is that people do to decompress. There's then definitely a knowledge that a lot of players play because they're really interested in the tactical side of the game. A lot of players have mentioned to us in the past that they've used it to scout opposition. I think the beauty of it is that at the very core of it, it's just because they might be a Champions League winner, but they're just hardcore football fans. They love the game, and there's no real distinction or separation between them and me, having started playing all those years ago, or anyone else that plays now. It's a way for them to extend the love of the game. And certainly there's definitely a proportion as well who are interested in the coaching and the management side of things. We've learned that very recently with a brand ambassador and a talent deal that we're working with on FM23.
So clearly a lot of professional players love the game, they play it organically. You have also done paid partnerships with the likes of Pedri, who was your hero star for Football Manager 2022. How successful was that?
Yeah, you're very successful, especially when you measure it against, kind of key objectives such as awareness or kind of territory penetration. I think, the decision to work with talent, it always starts with a strategy that underpins, what type of talent would fit into the tactic. What's the story that you're trying to tell, through the prism of the talent's personal brand. I think with Pedri it was pretty simple. He was the wonder kid of the moment. He went on to have a fantastic season and also an incredible Euros. And the story was essentially the story of the ultimate wonder kid. And your kind of relationship and helping him achieve his potential. We're always analysing and measuring our success. And I think one of the things that we have done a lot of in the last few years is really the impact of advertising, advertising effectiveness. And I think we see time and again, through studies that, talent is what triggers recall and cut through. And, needless to say, one of the things that we need to be mindful of is the authenticity factor. Do they have a relationship to Football Manager? Is this an authentic story? If it's not, the audience is going to see right through it, and you'll end up spending X on the talent partnership and Y on the amplification, and it won't have the desired effect. So I think ultimately for us, it's strategy first. Where does the talent fit in? How can we amplify this story? And is it actually kind of conveying the proposition of the game? Talent will always generate cut through and recall by the nature of their personal brand, but how does it actually relate to Football Manager and the Football Manager proposition?
You talk about authenticity, and you touched on the UEFA deal earlier. I'm keen to sort of bring those two things together. Authenticity, I feel like, has always been an important attraction for Football Manager. Some of the stuff we were just talking about there about scouting or understanding the game in bigger detail ties into that. Firstly, for the uninitiated or who perhaps don't understand the importance of licensing, can you let us know what you can and can't do with a competition license? And then particularly as it relates to the UEFA deal, which is brand new for FM23, what that means for players of the game.
I won't touch on what we can and can't do. That's maybe not necessarily my area, per se. In terms of, let's focus through, the question about UEFA. So when the UEFA partnership was agreed and signed, there's various rights that enable us to embed those rights into the game, and whether that's the broadcast graphics, whether that's the artwork that they use for the cup draws or any other UEFA related material. So obviously our kind of design team will take that and it's never just branding. It's never just, oh, well, we have the rights now, let's just, brand up LEDs and, stadium perimeter boards and yada yada. It's how can we make this add to the authenticity and the immersion of the game? And, with the UEFA license in particular, that meant that we had to look at the way in which other rights are served in the game. And there wasn't necessarily the ability to just take what UEFA gave us and then just put it into the game. So we had to think about how this could enhance the overall experience. So what do you think about when you think about, Champions League nights? You think about the star ball in the centre of the pitch. You think about the walkouts. You think about the lineups. And of course, you think about the music, So in essence, what you're really trying to do there is you're trying to make the moment when it arrives in game, more immersive and more special. Because what we know is that quite a large proportion of our user base start at the very bottom of the pyramid. They maybe start with a local team. And after 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons, endeavouring to get to the Champions League promised land, we want that first walkout to feel, like I felt a couple of weeks ago when I went to Celtic Madrid, and it's literally spine tingling. The hairs are standing up on the back of your neck and your arms when you hear that music and the roar for the fans. And I think that's what it's about. It's about adding to the immersion, adding to the authenticity. You really work hard for your success in FM, and I think that partnership is really about rewarding you, when that comes along. And I think the reality is that, the beta has been out for a few days. Even by the time, November the 8th gets here, the official release date, some people won't even experience the Champions League for, another couple of months, by the time they actually get, Solihull Moors or Queen's Park to the heights of the competition. So when they've put in all of that time and commitment, we want it to feel special, the way that it would for a debutant pro, walking out to the Champions League music in real life,
It's another string to the bow, isn't it, about this immersion? I mean, there are lots of stories. I know people who will put a suit on when they're playing FA Cup final games in Football Manager. And, just for that one match, they put the suit on and they feel like they're at Wembley. And this feels like it's sort of another step as part of that experience that you get on Football Manager.
Absolutely.
Before we go, Alan, a couple of questions on Football Manager's role in sort of broader societal issues. And this is something that Miles talks about, being as a positive force for societal good. I think a great example of that is what happened during the pandemic, start of the pandemic, people in lockdown, and Sports Interactive decided to make the game free for everyone, essentially knowing that people were struggling, perhaps mental strain of being in lockdown. So who made that decision and what was the thinking behind it?
I think first and foremost, one of our studio values is considering the bigger picture and, using our kind of affluence as a brand to do good for others, when we're able to. The studio's a long-term relationship with Watchild and Kick It Out and other, kind of charitable endeavours. A lot of which Miles is obviously very central to as a personality. So we're always charged to think about the world around us. So when it came to the pandemic, it was actually really straightforward for us because, we looked at the situation and anticipated that all of a sudden people were going to become time rich. But we also noted as well that, due to the uncertainty, people might become unemployed. We had the furlough scheme that kicked in shortly thereafter. But prior to that, it was like, look, we're going to get a spike anyway, just like everyone in gaming was, because all of a sudden, any barriers to do things at home are going to be removed. Everyone's time rich. And, we've seen in the past when people buy the game, whether that's through sale periods or any other period, we can see what happens with new users in particular. We can see how their journey is different to people who have a relationship with the game historically. So we were like, look, we don't really want to have a spike of people buying the game. We'd rather that money was in their pocket. And, we had done a free weekend previously with Steam, who partnered with us on this. And we were like, look, let's get the game out for a week so that people can have no barrier, decide for themselves if they actually want to spend their money and spend their time with us. We extended that to 2 weeks. The reaction was unbelievably positive. And what it resulted in was people who were actually buying the game from an educated standpoint. They had made that conscious decision after having trialed the game and said, yeah, I want to part with, whatever it was it cost them. I think we gave them a discounted rate, during that period as well. But the kind of central, kind of element to that was like, as I said, through the prism of the studio values, like this could be an opportunity for us to step back and go, all of a sudden we're going to have all of these people who are time rich and leave the game at full price and just let it do its thing. But we just felt that just really wasn't the right thing to do. We ended up with close to 1 million new players, many of whom went on to buy the game, and many of whom are still with us now a couple of years later.
So there was a commercial rationale behind it, presumably as well, but first and foremost, it came from, let's try to help some people out in a difficult situation.
I think when you're selling a product, a commodity, there's always going to be a commercial element to it. I think for us, the central element of it was, it just felt like the right thing to do. As I said, we could have sat back and said, well, we're going to see a spike anyway, because the key barrier to playing FM is all of a sudden removed, and ask anyone who's ever played the game. Like it can be a really, kind of a good friend on a quiet weekend, when you've got, nothing to do and plenty of time to yourself. So, we just felt like in the context of our values and the bigger picture that, offering the opportunity for free and let people test it and decide if it was for them was the right avenue.
A conversation which always comes up in relation to new Football Manager games is women's football. Obviously, it's something that we talk about a lot in the industry, in the football industry as a whole. On this podcast, we talk about women's football many times as well. Miles wrote a blog post about a year ago saying that it's in the pipe works, it's going to come, it's just not something to be rushed. And that I thought was probably made sense for lots of reasons. The expansion, the interest, the rise of the importance of women's football kind of means that that's probably an inevitability. But it was interesting, I found in that blog post from Miles, and I'll read it here. He said, "We believe in equality for all and we want to be part of the solution." That was interesting because he really put that as a sort of driving force for let's get women's football into the game. Obviously, there are a lot of big considerations about how to do it, and it's not simple. But he sort of put that really as the most important factor for doing it.
Yeah, I mean, implementing the women's game into something as complicated as Football Manager, currently is a real complex endeavour. It's divided into many areas as well. You've got the animation side of things, which needs to differ from the mail capture. You've got collecting all of the data, which is brand new. The Football Manager database has been building for 25 years. You've got the kind of the research, the licensing, translation, and then you've got the kind of gameplay and the design, because the women's game is different from the men's game. And I think, whilst we've made really good progress internally over the last 12 months, I think it's been slower in many areas than we would have hoped and anticipated. It's always been communicated, as a multi-year project. And the reality of the situation is that we really need the time to get it right, because the reason why people play Football Manager is because we've went to the nth degree to really meticulously model the world of football. So that's what they expect of Football Manager. And cards on the table, like, we don't feel comfortable, rushing it out before it's ready, because we want the women's game to be a living, breathing world the way that the men's game is, because that's what it deserves to be. And I think that's what Miles is talking about as well when he speaks about the equality aspect. And I think, taking our time to do this properly, I think we'll have the desired effect, which is to excite, fans of the women's game. And I think rushing stuff out to maybe fit a moment. We've just had the women's Euros, for example, and, I suppose you could have looked at that and went, this is a good opportunity to kind of piggyback on the top of it. But that's no SI. That's really not what we're about at all. We've actually had similar things recently about why we never looked at international management for the World Cup. And, based on our analysis of, who plays international management and based on our feelings towards the opportunity, it never fit with what we wanted to do. And I'm sure that causes a lot of, fan frustration in terms of, the time factor or the delays or just the kind of the anticipation to get to get our hands on it. But we need to take our time, and I think it's something that we'll be addressing over the coming weeks, probably in the form of another kind of Miles type blog where he talks quite openly about some of the challenges that we're experiencing and outlines more of a time frame for when people can expect it.
Do you think it's the biggest thing right now, the sort of future editions of Football Manager and what will be coming to it? Do you think it's kind of the most pressing issue, or is it the thing you get asked about the most? Or is there something else that you can sort of tantalizingly talk about, which is sort of the big question?
I'll be honest, I take this back to the audience and I put this through the prism of personas. And this is why we've done a tremendous amount of audience work over the last couple of years, is that from persona to persona, from segment to segment, they all want and care about very different things. Some people would just forgo any real new features and just have an enhanced engine, crisper animation, for example. Some people don't care about that. Some people play still with the 2D dots, and what they want is more, data and power to really stamp their vision on the world, So the reality of the situation is that it's one of many things that the different types of, players and prospects are eager about. And, needless to say, when you're servicing a global fan base of, millions of players, there needs to be a balance, there needs to be a balance. Because, I think in the context of whether it's resource or budget or, various other factors that comprise making games, we can't do everything in any given cycle. And I think the things that we do and want to do, Miles always talks about like a particular kind of, percentage that things have to achieve in terms of like, kind of performance and experience and value. And if something isn't there or we can't get it to there in a particular cycle, then it gets put into the roadmap for future iterations. And as I said, and as I touched on, totally appreciate that creates, fan frustration. But this is the complex endeavour of making games,
No, Alan, I know that there is a long list of possible new features that might be part of the next or the following Football Manager game, so I won't press you too hard on that. And we should probably leave it there. But Alan, thank you very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks for listening. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes. All the best.